Thanks very much for coming. Welcome to the medical series. I'm not sure exactly why you're all here. This is about the aging process. None of you need to know about that. You're all young. I need to know about it, that's for sure. So today, we're very fortunate to have with us Dr. Bruce Mutter. And Dr. Mutter is a medical director of Morningside Retirement Community. And he's also board certified in geriatrics. He's board certified in family practice. He's a graduate of the University of Toronto. He did his family practice residency at the University of Toronto. He's been a recognized authority in family practice in this community for many years. And he's now the medical director at Morningside. And he's going to be talking to us on why I, not you necessarily, why I am getting old. And so please welcome Dr. Bruce Mutter. Bruce?
Thank you, Joe. Thank you. Good morning. I am a family practitioner, and about halfway through my career, I became interested in geriatrics and went back and took the geriatric exams and got board certified. And so now run a geriatric practice here in Fullerton. And also, as Dr. Lawton mentioned, I've been the medical director at Morningside for about 3 years. So at Morningside, we have about 600 residents divided into 4 levels. Most of our residents are in independent living, so they live in their own homes, just like you or I, except they're within our community. And then we have assisted living for people who need a little more help, a memory care unit for those who develop dementia, and finally, a skilled nursing facility, Park Vista, for those who are coming toward, who require increasing amounts of help towards the ends of their lives. So we see the whole spectrum of aging. And this is becoming a hot topic. As I was walking out the door, my wife handed me this. Okay, so this is MIT technology, and the whole issue is on this. So we're, another hot topic. And there's a tremendous amount of new data which is coming out on the aging process. And so I appreciate the opportunity to come down and talk to you today about this. We're going to take a little dive into some geriatrics, some theoretical geriatrics. And there will be a little biology, a little biochemistry, and a little physiology. But I think you'll find that will inform some pretty practical guidelines, which we'll talk about at the end of that with that theoretical background, to give you some evidence-based guidelines on helping you navigate your path through the aging process, and also your families. I'll tell you that in my work at Morningside, I'm privileged to work with a number of 85, 90, 95-year-olds and a few hundred-year-olds, many of whom are remarkably fit, even to advanced age. So I'd like to start with a success story, and it's quite a success story. In the past century, from 1900 to 2000, human life expectancy has increased a remarkable 20 years. Now, nothing like this has ever happened in the 100 or 200,000 years that Homo sapiens and its primate cousins have been wandering the earth. Totally new area. 20 years in the past century. And I've got this in graphic form here. This is American life expectancy in males. And you see from 1900 to 2000, the blue is white Americans, and the red is African American. And you see this nice 20-year, and in the case of the black people, even more increase in life expectancy. Now, you see this nice upward curve, but it's not all smooth. You see the little bumps here. And so this is the Great Depression and World War II. But I'm going to ask, what is this? The flu, yeah, okay. You guys may have, I brought this, I've been bringing this slide every time I talk for this year to commemorate the influenza epidemic, which this is the centennial of that. Between 1918 and 1919, the winter of 1918 to 1919, more than 50 million, possibly as high as close to 100 million people died that winter. About 5% of the world population, maybe 1 person in 20, died in the winter of 1919. I just find it curious that we haven't celebrated that this year. Yeah, I mean, it's mentioned, but nowhere do we celebrate, commemorate 9/11, World War II, et cetera, but we don't commemorate this. So I've just been trying to bring this slide in this year as a memorial to these unfortunate folks. And of course the question is, will it come back? We don't know. So let's move on. I want to first hit some definitions. So life expectancy is how long we can expect to live. Lifespan is how long it is possible for an organism to live. And then health span is how long you can remain healthy in the lifespan. Okay? Get those concepts straight. Life expectancy, lifespan, health span. So, going back, all of this improvement in life expectancy has been in the area of increasing life expectancy. We haven't done anything to increase lifespan. Just by attacking disease, we have made people's life expectancy closer and closer to their possible lifespan. 2/3 of this improvement have been in public health measures like clean water, sanitation, suppression of tuberculosis, smallpox, etc. And 1/3 have been in medical areas. Improvements in heart disease care, cancers, and stopping smoking routines, and so on. Okay, so increase in life expectancy. We are beginning to do some basic research in measures to increase lifespan, and I'd just like to take a little minute to go into some of this theoretical work, which is on the cusp of medical research. So, efforts to increase lifespan artificially. There's always stem cells, okay? Everywhere we look in medicine, there's stem cells. So far, not much beneficial stuff coming out of this. We could kind of talk about stem cells are kind of like, to medicine, what nuclear fusion is to physics. We're going to solve all our energy crises when we can learn how to burn hydrogen into helium, and it's going to be tremendously important, but it'll be 10 years down the line, and we've been talking like that for 30 years, and we're still 10 years away. So stem cells are a bit like that. Eventually, I believe that they will be tremendously important. The ability to harvest pluripotent stem cells from people to modify them and then inject them back into that person or somebody else is eventually going to be pivotal, but we're decades away from anything clinical. Epigenetics, kind of similar. Here we're not modifying the DNA, but we're modifying all the enzymes which surround and support the DNA. A lot of work here, but again, nothing clinical. Going down to things which are a little more closer on the time horizon to clinical usefulness, there's a lot of work on starvation. I don't know if any of you are familiar with this. If you take a whole multitude of animals, all the way from yeast cells through worms to mice to primates to monkeys, and you put them on a semi-starvation diet, they live about 30% longer. Okay? Semi-starvation, a 30% increase in life expectancy over a whole range of animals. Hasn't been tried in man yet. But we've done some research on this phenomena, and the critical area appears to be things called telomeres. Are any of you familiar with telomeres? So these are little units of DNA, little chunks of DNA that are stuck to the end of DNA molecules. So you have a big, long DNA molecule, and then on the end are between 50 and 70 of these little DNA subunits. When a cell divides, several of these telomere units are cleaved off. So as the animal ages, the telomere and the cells divide, the telomeres gradually shorten until you come to a critical shortened length, at which point the cell becomes senescent. That is, it doesn't die, but it won't divide anymore. Cells stop dividing. It appears that in the starvation situation, cell turnover is much slower. It slows down. So the cells don't divide, the telomeres don't shorten as much, and therefore the animal lives longer. So the question is, can we do this without starving people? Well, there's an enzyme called telomerase, which is what cleaves the little telomere units off. And so there's a lot of work being done on this. But this area is fraught with danger. We already have immortal cells in our bodies. They're called cancer cells. And the way cancer cells achieve immortality is by disabling telomerase. So if we disable telomerase, will we be causing obvious risks? Okay? Don't know. There's a lot of work being done on this. Moving to even more practical areas and closer timelines, we have 2 drugs now in clinical trials to extend human lifespan. Metformin, which is a diabetes drug. Some of you may be on it. It has very low side effects, and it extends lifespan in many, many animal models modestly. And metformin is now in clinical trials in humans to see if this will extend lifespan. It will be a number of years before we know the answer. The other drug is something called sirolimus. And there's another name for this called rapamycin. And this is a very potent anti-inflammatory agent. Suppresses inflammation. It's used in people who have transplants, especially kidney transplants, to suppress the inflammation and the rejection phenomena. It's also used, interestingly, on cardiac stents. You know, when the people have heart attacks, coronary disease, and they put a stent in, inside of the stent is lined with sirolimus, which prevents clotting. Sirolimus extends life expectancy in another whole variety of animal models by about 20%. It's fairly toxic, though. Fairly toxic, a lot of side effects. It will be entering human trials next year. Sirolimus itself is going to prove to be too toxic, but we may, if we can prove that it does extend human life expectancy, we may be able to get less toxic modifications of this drug. So that's basically an overview of the research on lifespan extension. We have been doing, again, to extend human life expectancy is by simply chipping away at diseases. Chipping away at diseases so people can live towards their normal lifespan. And so the question comes up, well, what is the normal human lifespan? Okay, and we really don't know. I see estimates in the literature from right all the way from we're at our human lifespan now, it's about 85 years with a wide individual variation, to papers, well-studied papers, published in respected journals, which advance the hypothesis that the human lifespan is actually in the area of 115 years. Okay? And again, we do not know. We do not know what the normal human lifespan is. But I suspect it's somewhere in between there. It may be up towards 100 years or more. So there's still lots of ground left for us to keep hacking away at diseases, improving disease management, and letting us get up towards even a natural human lifespan, which is considerably longer than what we're enjoying now. I doubt in this century that we'll get 20 years like we did in the last century. But I believe a good 10 years is possible. Okay? Now, a little dose of reality here. In fact, this increase in human lifespan, which has been going on since 1900, has started to peak. It started peaking in 2013, and 2015 and 16, it's been totally flat, even slightly negative. The reason for this are twofold. One is primarily the opioid crisis. So on all these tens of thousands of opioid deaths that we've been seeing, those tend to occur in young people. And so for every young person who dies, that's maybe 50 years or so of life expectancy lost, as opposed to somebody like us, who it might be 10 years. So those opioid deaths have an enormous effect on life expectancy. The other factor is the obesity epidemic, which is driving huge amounts now of diabetes, hypertension, heart disease, and so on. And we physicians, especially gerontologists, are looking at this and thinking this is just a tsunami which is building, which is going to just rip through our population. And we can just imagine these young, obese, hypertensive diabetics and seeing them when they're 60 and 80, and they're not going to get to 80, and it's just it's a nightmare situation. I want to point out that we have done this to ourselves. There is no reason why we cannot continue this expansion of life expectancy other than what we are doing to ourselves. I believe that future generations may look at us at our time and think, what were they thinking? That's awful. So I see my vision of the future is we'll continue to work on chipping away at disease. The American Geriatric Society, along with other societies like Family Practice and Internal Medicine, have looked at these declining life expectancy curves with horror and have promoted evidence-based practical guidelines to help us get back onto this upward life expectancy curve, and we will be going into those shortly. Okay. Time for the quadrilateral curve. We're going to do a graph, okay, of human capability and age, okay? Human capability and age. And the usual customary thinking is we're born, we grow, we reach our maximum capability at 25 to 30, and after 25 to 30, it's all downhill from there until we're gone. Okay? That was the old view. The geriatrics view is this. We are born, we get to our maximum capability at 25 to 30, but then there's a very gradual reduction in capability. If you can picture the graph, that decline is felt to be in the area of 7% per decade in geriatrics. Okay? So when you're 30 and then you get to be 80, at 80 you should be capable of about 60 to 65% of what you were able to do when you were 30. Okay? 7% per decade. Now, there are elite geriatric people in which that decline is about half of that, 3 or 4%. Now, everybody looks at these older athletes who are running half marathons and so on and so forth and think, isn't this wonderful? No, we consider those the normals. Those are the normals, and everything below that is abnormal, okay? You've got to shift your frame of reference in this. People are living longer. People are living longer. We hope to get another 10 years of life expectancy out of this century, and maybe towards the end of this century, the second half of this century, we may be getting some of the technology coming on board to begin to increase lifespan. And I believe in coming centuries, human lifespan will be expanded dramatically. We need to change our frame of reference. Now, what curve you're going to follow on this, whether you're going to be on this weird triangle thing, I'm born and I live to my life expectancy, and then downhill, or you're going to be on the quadrilateral like this, up here, is really a study of frailty. Frailty. Because frailty is what drops people from the quadrilateral curve back down to this declining triangle. And that's where we will be going next. Okay. So frailty is becoming recognized as a distinct clinical disease. It is a disease which is more common with aging, but it is not part of aging, just like diabetes, heart failure, certain cancers, and lymphomas are more common as you get older, but they're not part of aging. Normal people who are aging do not get these. We're seeing frailty as just another one of those diseases. It is not inevitable. It has many causes, some of which we'll get into. But the most common cause is just it's many causes, like cancers, strokes. If you get Lou Gehrig's disease, you're going to get frail, okay? But that's not most of the frailty. Most of the frailty is just nothing specific. It's just people are getting old and they get frail. And that's where our target's going to be. Okay, many causes all end with the same disease. The characteristics of this syndrome of frailty. And this is going to start to get a little technical, and bear with me, and if you don't follow, let me know and I'll explain. But the characteristic, the central feature of it is sarcopenia. And sarcopenia means loss of muscle mass. So as we get older, muscles tend to turn to fat. Decreased muscle bulk. As a result of that, we get slowed motor performance, especially walking. And so in geriatrics, we measure people's walking speeds. Decreased activity, these people just start to sit more. They're just there. Fatigue in the later stages. And the fatigue becomes profound and ever present. It is not relieved by sleep. So these people who are frail are as tired when they wake up as they were when they went to sleep. Loss of balance and fall risk starts as we get further into the syndrome. And in time, people get nutritional deficits and they just don't want to eat. They lose their appetite. And weight loss. I want to emphasize that cognitive decline is not part of the frailty syndrome. So we have many of our people who have become quite frail, but are cognitively completely intact. These poor souls are prisoners within their dying bodies. And the sense of frustration and helplessness and despair is just unimaginable. Okay, now it's going to get even a little more technical, and I want to point out that I do have a handout of slides, so you can, we'll hand those out at the end. Bear with me through this next slide. We are actually going to go into some of the biochemistry of the frailty syndrome. And I think if we go through it slowly and you understand some of these basic principles, you will understand some of the guidelines for preventing frailty. And the whole mission of the American Geriatric Society is to anchor these recommendations in science. Okay, so here comes the science. All right. I've got this in slides. You don't need to type notes. Okay, this is the frailty cycle. And it starts here. Remember we talked about sarcopenia, loss of muscle mass. Okay. So muscles deteriorate. And I want you to follow through on some of these cycles. Muscles deteriorate, strength and power deteriorates because of that, and walking speed slows. The sarcopenia is produced by these various things, diseases, medications, age-related changes. Age-related changes are the most common, and that's what we'll be focusing on. Okay. There's another cycle here. Because of the loss of muscle mass, something called VO2 max begins to drop. And VO2 max is the volume of oxygen that a person can consume during exercise in 1 minute. Muscle burns oxygen. If we lose muscle, we lose the ability to burn oxygen. So VO2 max is dropping. And if you can't burn oxygen, you become weaker. It's just, so. Well, this here, as VO2 max comes down, walking speed drops. Just like if you're at altitude, you can't exercise like you can at sea level. It's the same principle. These produce this decrease in activity, resulting in the loss of appetite. Anorexia is loss of appetite, decreased total body expenditure, up to chronic undernutrition, and of course that just feeds more muscle loss. So these people have these, activate these cycles, it comes up here, back over to here, they're eating less protein, and their muscles deteriorate even quicker, and it's a downward spiral. I want to draw your attention to one other important area, which is over here. Now this is the new stuff, and it's counterintuitive. It's not something you would figure out. All this stuff sort of makes sense, doesn't it? All right? This is new. The sarcopenia, loss of muscle mass, produces what's called insulin resistance, decreased insulin sensitivity. So people have insulin in their bodies, but the insulin doesn't work well. And as a result, older people tend to their blood sugars tend to go up. We've known this for years, but we didn't understand the importance of it. It turns out, and now we're getting into bench biochemistry. It turns out that the insulin resistance feeds an inflammatory process within the body. It turns on the body's immune system to produce inflammation. And we've known for years that blood tests of immune markers showing inflammation rise in the elderly. We didn't know why, we didn't know the importance. But it turns out that it's driven primarily by insulin resistance. This immune activation and inflammation greatly exaggerates this negative cycle of frailty. It makes it much worse. So the take-home message is that insulin sensitivity is critical. Insulin resistance is critical. Now, the area of attack on this vicious downward cycle is precisely here, the sarcopenia, preventing muscle loss. And this is precisely biochemically why you should exercise. So the American Geriatric Society wants to see everybody exercising, which we'll get into, and they've added not only aerobic exercise, but they want to see resistance exercises in everybody. In particular, we want to work on upper body muscle bulk, not just the legs. We want chest, arms, okay, the whole thing. Quickly go over lab tests. You know, doctors, we have to have lab tests. We can measure a decreased lean body mass, not so much clinically, but in research studies. Insulin resistance can be measured, and the diabetes and increased insulin levels. The inflammatory markers, SED rate, which many of you may have had. CRP is also used a lot, and IL-6 is a research study, but all these are increased, saying the immune system's increased. Hormonal changes, testosterone and DHEA are decreased. Cortisol, which is a compound coming from the adrenal glands, is actually increased. And then we have anemia, the anemia of senescence, and then nutritional deficits, especially low protein levels. And you can see this in the blood tests. You know, we follow people for years, and their protein levels are stable, and all of a sudden they begin to get frail and their proteins drop, especially albumin. Vitamins D and B12 go down, and interestingly, cholesterol goes down in the frailty syndrome. And drops in cholesterol are particularly ominous in frail people. I'll rush through this because I want to get to the practical things. Frailty stages. Predisposed, there's 3 stages. You're predisposed, you're not frail, but you're at risk, and basically any middle-aged person is at some risk of developing the frailty syndrome. Early signs, the early overt signs, and the most common, the most sensitive is actually walking speed. Okay, or we do something called the get up and go test, where you sit in a chair. I don't know if some of you may have had this done to you. You sit in a chair with your arms crossed. Stand up with your arms crossed. Don't use the chair for support. Walk, turn around, and come sit back down again. Time it. Okay, the get up and go test. And then advance. And now. Frailty is very much, the age-related frailty is very much preventable in these early stages. And then we get the advanced stages. It is not reversible. You can't cure it, but you can make it better. The mortality rate rises, though. Okay, now, okay, so we're getting onto the prevention stuff, which I wanted to spend a little time on. Given all that, here are the prevention measures that are suggested. First, Mediterranean diet. Mediterranean diet is preferred over the, I'm going to back up a minute, one disclaimer. These are general comments. Everybody needs to have their own personal plan in this, and you need to work this out with your physician, okay? This in no way is recommendations for your care. This is just guidelines, and you should discuss these measures with your personal physician, because it will vary. People are different. Okay, Mediterranean diet. In a lot of ways is preferred over the low cholesterol diet. It is related to dramatic drops in heart disease, and a number of cancers, and some improvement in Alzheimer's. There's talk of doing another lecture on the blue zones, in which case we talk an awful lot of time about the Mediterranean diet. And the other thing about it, it tastes good. You know, they have restaurants with this. Can you imagine a restaurant with the American Heart Association stage 1 low cholesterol diet? Be out of business in a week. So this is, what we're looking for are things that people can live with. Okay? Practical guidelines you can live with. Mediterranean diet. Optimize health. Get your checkups. And concentrate on the big three: hypertension, blood sugar, cholesterol. Just quickly talking about these. Hypertension. The American Heart Association demonstrates that there is a risk reduction in blood pressure of heart disease and strokes, all the way down to a systolic of 120 millimeters. Okay? That risk is a linear curve down to 120 millimeters. We should all use holistic measures to get our blood pressure as close to 120 or below that we can. It's way harder when you're older, but the holistic measures are Mediterranean diet, exercise, and weight loss, salt restriction, and sometimes meditation. If your blood pressure is, for most people, if your blood pressure is over 140, it makes sense to use drugs. But still, the drugs are an afterthought. The core of treatment of hypertension is holistic measures. Holistic measures. And strive for 120. Same thing with blood sugar. Blood sugars tend to go up as you're getting older. Try to get them down. Mediterranean diet, exercise, weight loss. The threshold for using drugs can be between 7 to 7.5 to sometimes 8 in our older people on the A1C. But if your sugar is high, your A1C is a bit high, but not high enough to use drugs, don't accept that. strive to get that A1C down using holistic measures. And the same thing with cholesterol. You want to keep your cholesterol as low as possible. Again, with the holistic stuff, a Mediterranean diet actually lowers cholesterol. The use of drugs in older people is a little problematic. Statins, they do help. They reduce heart disease, they reduce cognitive deficits, and reduce the risk of Alzheimer's and strokes. But the risk of side effects is also higher in older people, so it depends. And the new cholesterol injection, the PCSK9 shots, have you ever heard of those? There's a shot now for cholesterol every 2 weeks, not a statin, called PCSK9, okay? Tremendously powerful, more powerful than the statins, has virtually no side effects, is hideously expensive. It's just come in, but as that price falls, and it will, we may have another very powerful weapon in the cholesterol struggle. Anyway, that's a whole other lecture. Avoid injury. And this is the dark side of exercise. This is the dark side of exercise. I'll tell you that most of our robust 90 and 95-year-olds have not been seriously injured in their lifetime. Okay? Injury really sidelines people, significant injuries. So you have to be careful. I'll share with my own experience. My passion was mountain biking, and I was riding aggressively mountain bikes at age 65. My specialty was hill climbs. Okay, so up over the logs and the rocks and the bike bouncing everywhere, and me with it. And I was really strong, but a chain is only as strong as its weakest link, and my weakest link was my L5 disc, which I blew out on a hill climb, and flat on my back for several months. Couldn't work for several months, and finally came back with a partial medical disability. My fitness disappeared within 6 or 8 weeks. My muscles just atrophied, and if I had been more careful and not done those dumb things, I would be in much better shape today. Okay? So, dark side of exercise, you have to avoid injury. Avoid social isolation. Loneliness is a huge problem in geriatrics, particularly in this community. The young people tend to leave. You know, it's expensive, taxes are high, so on and so forth. I've got 10 grandchildren, not one of them lives here. So it's an issue we deal with, and that's one of the things that Morningside is about. But there's other options. OLLI is a great answer to this. Okay? And we're blessed in Fullerton. We have a lot of mechanisms for preventing this. Avoid depression. Get sleep. Sleep is becoming... We used to think that just when you went to sleep, your brain just turned off. It doesn't. All sorts of things wake up. All sorts of neural circuits. We're not aware of them, but all sorts of neural circuits wake up, which are very, very critical to health, and particularly things like consolidation of memory, and so on and so forth. Sleep is, and again, that's another lecture. And then exercise and balance training, and I want to go into this. The specifics of exercise. And this is research-based. I want to come to the bottom part first. Exercise benefits are non-linear. Now, another graph. Another graph, okay? So if you've got the exercise benefit here and the amount of exercise here, we used to think this was linear. So the harder you exercise, the more benefit you got, like that, okay? In fact, the research is showing that the curve is parabolic. So you get most of your benefit at lower levels of exercise when you first start. And then as you exercise more and more, the intensity, you do get more benefit, but the aliquot of benefit per unit of increased exercise begins to drop. So it's parabolic. You get most of your benefit at lower levels of exercise. Also, in people who have exercised all their lives, we always thought that they would be in better shape than somebody who begins to exercise later in life. And in fact, we're finding that's not the case. Somebody who begins to exercise later in life can achieve almost the same level of fitness as somebody who has been exercising all their lives. Also, if somebody has been exercising all their lives and stops exercising, they lose the benefits very quickly. So exercise is coming out, is appearing to be not something like a bank account where I can just keep storing this benefit. It's a more immediate thing. And all of these things, the importance of avoiding sarcopenia, preserving muscle mass, the nonlinear benefit, where you get most of the benefit when you start to exercise, and the fact that if you exercise later in life, you still can achieve great levels of fitness, are all evidence-based recommendations which should encourage everybody to start to exercise. It is not too late. And the amount of exercise has actually been calculated. So it's 150 minutes of light intensity exercise, which is walking, or 75 minutes per week of moderate exercises, which is working out in a gym. And we want to see resistance training, as I mentioned, the upper body, not just walking. From a practical point of view, this is the easiest. This is like 2 40-minute sessions in the gym a week will do it. 2 40-minute sessions a week. And our message is virtually everybody can do that. I'm very busy with my professional commitments and personal life commitments, et cetera, but I can find time to do that. And the message is everybody needs to find time to do that. It doesn't have to be an hour and a half in the gym 4 or 5 days a week. 2 40-minute sessions per week. Balance training in addition. And again, the exercise benefit is non-linear. We're out of time here. I'm going to entertain questions unless I have one more part of this, which is balance stuff. I don't know if you want to end here and do questions or you want to do balance. Do balance? All right. Do balance. Okay. Huge part of the frailty syndrome. As people become frail, they become unsteady, they fall, and that just feeds more frailty. Balance is composed of 3 components. One is the visual component. I'm standing here, I establish a horizon. The second is the proprioception. I'm standing here, I can feel my feet. I know where they are, where my muscles, sensory feedback. And the third is vestibular function in my inner ears. This is my organ of balance, okay? 3 components. Just for your edification, let's just take a look at the vestibular system. I find it fascinating. So this is the balance mechanism in the inner ear. You know, so the outside ear, the middle ear, and then the very inside of the ear, the inner ear. And it has 2 components. One is the cochlea, that little sort of snail-like thing you remember you see pictures of that's been cut away. And then right next to it is the labyrinth, which is the balance mechanism. The labyrinth is composed of 3 semicircular canals, which are set in XYZ space. on each side. The reason we have 3 canals is that we live in a 3-dimensional universe. So there's 1 canal for each dimension, length, width, height, on each side. The canals are filled with fluid. Floating in the fluid are little crystals. The position of these crystals is sensed by these nerves, which come down here to what's called the 8th cranial nerve here. And the nerves send signals to the brainstem. As the exact position of these crystals. So now as we turn, as we move, because of inertia, the crystals floating in the fluid will go one way on one side and the other way on the other side in that plane. If you do a little experiment, and Isaac Newton did this experiment actually, take a pail of water, a bucket of water with a handle full of water, and turn the bucket. The fluid stays still, the bucket turns. So there is movement of the fluid in the bucket relative to the wall of the bucket. Just imagine, bucket full of water, turn it, and the fluid's there and the wall moves, okay? So the same thing's happening here, except this is a semicircular canal, not a bucket. When we move in that plane, these little crystals move, and they feed information to the brainstem as to what that movement is. So this is basically, for you engineers, this is like a biological gyroscope measuring angular acceleration. Now I will leave it to your imagination to watch a gymnast like Simone Biles and all this going on a millisecond clock speeds. I just find mind-boggling. Okay. All right. So in aging, what happens is vestibular function begins to drop. Proprioception, your nerve cells begin to drop, and we begin to depend more and more on visual clues to keep us balanced. So we're depending on that horizon and not so much on this and this. And that's why older people fall in dark rooms. So you can train your body to improve balance. We have balance and fitness classes. Also, Tai Chi has been clearly shown to improve balance. But there's another mechanism that we use that is for people who don't have time to go to the classes and so on and so forth. Find something that you have to do every day and make it a balance exercise. Getting dressed. So, got to put on underwear or shorts. Do it standing up. Now you need to be in a place where you aren't going to fall, where you can grab something. Put the shorts on, standing up. Okay? And when you get good at that, let's try putting on a slip-on shoe standing up. Then, when you get good at that, let's put on socks standing up. And then it gets a little harder. You can go up to putting on a lace-up shoe, but do up the laces as you are. Okay, all right. So you got to get dressed, and this just gives you a daily. And again, the whole purpose of all of this is to get guidelines that people can live with. You know, you have to have a life. We want you to be happy. We don't want you to be frail. These are things you can do. All right? I'm going to end it here and open up for questions.
What are the characteristics of the anemia of senescence?
What are the characteristics of the anemia of senescence? the hemoglobin will usually drop to around 10. It doesn't usually get much below that for the anemia of senescence. There's red blood cell indices that, you know, a measurement of the size of red cells and so forth. No, I think they stay down. So microcytic, somewhat microcytic, I believe, yeah. Yeah, so the question is, does using testosterone to increase your testosterone level increase the risk of cancer? And that's controversial. The cancer that we worry about is cancer of the prostate. Studies have been shown, there have been studies which have been done which there was no increased risk of prostate cancer, but the study was not large enough to be powered to detect a small increased risk of prostate cancer. So there was no major increased risk of prostate cancer, but they couldn't rule out a small increased risk because the study was not large enough.
So that's only prostate cancer?
Prostate cancer, yeah. No, yeah, that's the one that's primarily we're concerned about, okay? I will tell you that the effectiveness of testosterone supplementation is much less in older, frail people than in young athletes. Okay, they take testosterone, but they don't get the same bounce that a young athlete would get. Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, the starvation thing. What if it's just eating less and not really starving? Would that affect your telomeres?
We don't know. The studies have not been done in man, just in a whole bunch of lower animals. We do have people who come in and do follow a very semi-starvation diet. So certainly they get a benefit from weight loss, and they're not obese, and their blood sugars are down, and their cholesterol's down, and blood pressure. But is that slowing telomere shortening? We don't know at this point. So the question is, 40 minutes twice a week is considered the minimal and enough to prevent frailty. What happens if you do more than that? Yeah, you will get more benefit, but remember it's parabolic, so the increase in benefit begins to, per increased unit of exercise, begins to drop. But certainly, and you know, particularly if you want to increase the fitness level, if you're trying to do something, you need to exercise more than twice a week. You have to go to 3 or 4, yeah. And any guidelines on the inflammation of the body, and it's not good. We really don't know how to counter it. I mean, we use prednisone sometimes, but it's too toxic for long-term use. That's what sirolimus is about, rapamycin. But a lot of toxicity. So we don't have any practical. And foods and all this haven't been proven to change the inflammatory process.